Week 8 overview. This week we are talking about Chapter 8 of our course text, which deals with sociocultural elements and their impact on your marketing campaign. The key concepts covered in Chapter 8 in much greater detail than this overview will provide are the different areas of study around human behavior and culture, the concept of socialization and the institutions in which we are all socialized, no matter where we live in the world. Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions are also discussed in great detail. These are cultural aspects of people and individuals within certain countries, which was created as a theoretical framework by Geert Hofstede, who is a Dutch psychologist who worked for IBM for many years. IBM being one of the world's first truly multinational corporations. Hofstede studied over 100,000 employees in different countries throughout the world and came up with these 6 categories to explain the cultural differences when doing business across many different countries. And finally, the chapter ends with a discussion and a caveat to marketers about ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. What is culture and why is it so instructive about informing the way we think, act, and interact with others? The fields of psychology, sociology, and anthropology are just a few fields of study that really study what drives us. Plato is famous for saying all human behavior derives from our desires, our emotions, and our knowledge. So where do we construct the knowledge that contributes to how we think and feel when we interact with others, and what it is that we desire? We can also think of something you may have been introduced to if you took Psychology 101, and if you haven't, you must. Is Maslow's hierarchy. All of us are constantly engaging in the world and with others to get our basic needs met: food, clothing, safety, shelter. Once those needs are met, we move on to more esteem-based needs, and finally, all the way up to the top of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization. So how is it that we feel the most self-actualized? Our interactions with others, for many of us, for the most part, we're not consciously thinking about these things, but they do, in fact, reach into our subconscious and inform what we feel is right and what we feel is wrong, and they guide our behaviors, our emotions, and our interactions. And a final idea I want you to consider as you read this chapter is that culture will eat strategy for breakfast every time. This saying is often used in corporate America, meaning whatever strategies you implement as part of your culture, as part of your strategic plan for your business, they will be quickly eaten alive by the culture of your business, meaning sometimes the culture will be in opposition to the strategies you set, and anytime those two things are in tension with each other, culture wins every time. The reason I think it's apropos here is that as you're creating an international marketing plan, the strategies that you employ to reach your target consumers in international markets will easily be eroded and or eaten by not really understanding the culture in which you are implementing those strategies. Very briefly, the field of marketing relies on many fields of study relating to human behavior and culture. However, the main 3 that you need to be most aware of are psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Psychology being the study of what drives human behavior. Sociology really looks at what are the ways a society functions in a given place and time. And anthropology does the same. It looks at human civilizations, but over a longer range of time, not just an isolated moment. So some questions from each of these fields that might be asked on psychology is what drives human behavior? Why do we make the decisions we make and or not? What makes us not act? This is very important, as you could imagine, in the field of marketing, because we're constantly trying to reach our consumers to act, to consume our goods and services that we are trying to sell. And where do our thoughts derive? The previous slide, we talked a lot about this coming from our socialization, and we'll talk about that more in the next slide. Sociology is the is again the study of a culture in a given place and time, or a society would be a better way to say it. And we'll talk about the distinction between those two things very briefly. But some questions a sociologist might ask is, in what ways is urban life different from rural life in China today? Or they could even have a historical lens and ask a question like, what are the gender norms for women in 1950s America? They're much more isolated in a specific time, but they're looking at the roles of people and humans and how they interact with others. Anthropology has a much longer range view, and it is looking at civilizations mostly from a historical lens. And some big questions are asked about a span of time. So, this first question, what were the causes of the rise and fall of a civilization? Or how did religion evolve in Western European culture? All of these things are important to marketers because many cultures derive their human behaviors from their past. Their cultural narratives that are passed down through many generations live inside of the institutions in which people are socialized, and this is, at its very basic level, what drives our human behavior. And I've met, and I'm sure you have too, people who say, no one decides what I do except for me, or no one tells me what to believe except for me. And what I say to those people is, Socialization is a major topic throughout Chapter 8. Every human is socialized through institutions, norms, and prevailing customs and values of the society and culture in which they live. In red here, you'll see that this happens through human interaction, much as I've described in the previous slides. The savvy marketer observes and studies how socialization occurs within their target population. So, what are you looking for? What are you actually trying to find proof or evidence or research around? It could be not only current but historical family roles within a society, and even how they evolved if you're looking at it in an anthropological lens. Gender roles and the norms around male and females within a society are also an important thing to look at. Education, the level of formal education within a society and how people are educated will impact how people can interact with certain products, especially when you look at literacy rates. If your campaign would require a level of literacy higher than your target consumers possess, you could imagine that that's not going to be able to go over very well and will not reach them in the way you intend. Another thing that socializes people is population density. The basic concept here is in major cities where the population is more dense, people come across many different types of ideologies, people, different types of environments, and also spatially they're used to being a little closer to other people, and this definitely impacts their own behavior and how they think of the world. Healthcare seems like it might not belong on this list, but what people's perceptions are around who is responsible for their health, to what extent they have their own accountability, or what is the role of the state or government in ensuring that all people have a baseline level of care, especially when you're dealing with health products, health related products. This construct within a society will inform what people believe about certain products and certain messages they're hearing through your ad. And it should come as no surprise to anybody that religion is an agent of socialization. What your religious beliefs are, what the dominant religious beliefs are within a society or a culture, whether you participate them in or not, does inform how you behave as a consumer. Not just thinking about a larger religious institution, but even localized faith communities have a huge impact on consumer behavior. Who we work for and who we work with also impacts us. It shapes our interactions on an almost daily basis, almost to the level of family. In some cases, some of us see our coworkers more than we see our family. In my office, it was about a year and a half ago, I first saw someone in my office with one of those swell bottles, of a canteen that holds cold things cold and hot things hot for a much longer period of time and is antibacterial. and it also happens to not be made of plastic. So this led us all to asking our head of our office to invest in more water coolers and more jugs of water to put in the water coolers. And I saw that our consumption of water and that go up dramatically just in the last year and a half. It's now a norm in our office that you just don't want to be the person walking around with a little plastic bottle of water that then has to be thrown away over and over and over. Not because we even had a conversation about it so much as that it just seemed to naturally happen this way. So you would actually be engaging in off-norm behavior in our office now if you were to not use some other vessel that's not plastic to drink water from. Another topic that is listed here in the image to the right on the wagon wheel here is mass media. We're constantly being bombarded by many different messages, not only marketing, but even news. It becomes so segmented now, there's particular brands of news for certain types of viewpoints. It definitely shapes not only our worldview, but what we believe, think, and feel, and how we interact with others. And having said that, you now know this will definitely change our consumer behavior. Hofstadter's 6 cultural dimensions, as mentioned in the introduction today, is really about a study of how people within different culture or societies throughout the world interact with others around 6 specific dimensions. The people he studied were all mostly IBM employees, and he also looked at things on a national level, which some people criticize as being overly broad, and that is something to remember, that many people do not engage in on-norm behavior all the time within a society. However, we are able to know through marketing that segmentation and understanding and naming groups of people will help us yield better results. So there are patterns in which we can rely upon to craft our messages around. But while you are doing business with others, it's important to note these 6 areas, these 6 dimensions. They're discussed in much greater detail in the book, but the power distance within a culture really has to do with, on the high end, if you look at the lower chart here on this slide, is that some countries people are much more willing to embrace very hierarchical structures. In other cultures, there's no tolerance for that, and we would call it, on the other end of the spectrum, they're egalitarian countries. An example of the countries that score the lowest on the power distance spectrum here would be Austria and Israel. And many Southeast Asian and many African countries might score higher on the hierarchical scale. There's no value judgment here. We'll get more into that later when we talk about ethnocentrism. It's just something to be mindful of when you are engaging in business with other people, to understand and sit back and know, is it okay to question authority, or is there group decision making more the norm there? That's something that you want to pay attention to. We talked in an earlier chapter in the course about collectivism versus individualist societies. Collectivism, of course, being the belief that as a group we will function for the good of the group before we put our individual needs above the group. More individual societies will say it's for me to decide what's right for me, and I'm sort of here in the world to engage in a pursuit of happiness on my own terms, and whether that's good for the collective or not is not my primary concern. So many Western European societies tend to be more individualist. Again, more collectivist type societies you would find in East Asia, Latin, South America also. The next dimension will be the masculinity versus femininity. This has more to do with not so much male-female, but you want to look at it as is a more masculine culture, very invested in power, having power, people in power making all the key decisions, and or in a more feminine society, there's an idea that we are all here